Mr. Colton, your mailbox is not in compliance with Birchwood Estates community standards, and we have removed it. You will receive a citation in the mail, if you can find a way to receive it. That was Diane Marsh, president of the Birchwood Estates Homeowners Association, standing at the end of my gravel lane on a Tuesday morning in September with a folded letter in one hand and satisfaction arranged carefully on her face. My mailbox, the green painted steel post mount that Carol had picked out the spring before her first diagnosis, chosen because she said green was the only color that looked like it belonged at the end of a mountain lane, was gone. Post and all. The hole in the ground was still fresh enough that the displaced gravel had not settled back in around the edges, and the painted lettering on the side of the lost box, our house number in Carol's own hand, had gone with it. What Diane did not know, what she had never once bothered to look up in 4.5 years of presiding over the subdivision behind me, was that the lane she was standing on was mine. Every inch of the gravel, every inch of the drainage ditch alongside it, every inch of the road's surface beneath her kitten heels that were entirely wrong for the mountain terrain. She had never read my deed. She had never pulled the county plat map. She had never, in 5 years of clipboard authority, asked a single question about the land her husband's development company had built 112 houses around without securing the access rights to. And by the time this was over, she would learn that the street her 94 neighbors received their mail on was mine too, fee simple, recorded and filed with the county clerk 4 days before her attorney walked into the commissioner's hearing room. There was not a thing she or Gary or their lawyers could do about it except negotiate. So before I tell you the rest, I want to ask you something. If someone walked onto your property on a Tuesday morning and pulled out a mailbox your late wife had chosen and told you to pick up your citation from the box they had just removed, what would you have done? I had spent 26 years delivering other people's mail to that same county. I had delivered to every ranch, every cabin, every double wide at the end of every gravel lane from Hazel Creek to the Ridge. I knew what a mailbox meant to the person waiting on it. I knew what it meant to the person who had picked it out and asked her husband to sink the post level. I knew, the morning Diane stood at the end of my lane with her folded letter, exactly what kind of mistake she had just made, because she did not know what I knew, and that gap between what she knew and what I knew was the only tool I was ever going to need. My name is Ray Colton. I am 58 years old. I spent 26 years as a rural letter carrier out of the Hazel Creek Post Office in the Colorado foothills, and for the last 4 years, I have run a small road maintenance and drainage contracting business from my property on the south edge of what used to be the old Harbert Ranch. Before the surgery, I knew those mountain mail routes the way a surveyor knows fence lines. I knew which roads were county maintained, which were private easements used as public roads so long that everybody forgot somebody still owned them, and which ones were the kind of legal ambiguity that developers built subdivisions around and hoped nobody ever looked at too carefully. I moved to the foothills parcel after Carol passed. She had found it 3 years before she got sick. On a weekend drive up from the valley, when we had been looking, half seriously, at land we assumed we would never actually buy. It was 4.5 acres carved from the original Harbert Ranch in a 1961 subdivision, set back from the county road with a gravel access lane running along the southern edge. That lane ran inside my parcel boundary, not adjacent to it. It was recorded as Colton Lane on the county plat because Carol had insisted, when we closed, on having the name recorded. She told the title agent she had never owned anything with her name on it and was not going to start with 4.5 acres of mountain property and leave the road unnamed. The title agent laughed. I laughed. She had not been joking, and I knew it, and that was the reason I had laughed. The lane was a private easement, recorded in 1961 as part of the original ranch subdivision. And when we purchased our parcel, it conveyed with the deed in full. Fee simple rights to the surface, the subgrade, and the drainage easement alongside it. I was not a lawyer, but I was 26 years of knowing which roads had paperwork behind them and which ones were held together by habit and assumption. I knew what we had the day we signed. And I also knew, because I had driven every route in the county for more than 2 decades, that the Postal Service used Colton Lane as the ingress and egress for the entire Birchwood Estates delivery route. 94 homes, every piece of first-class mail, every package, every certified letter, every ballot, every prescription refill with a deadline. All of it traveled my lane on the way into that subdivision and on the way back out. 6 days a week, every delivery day. I kept the lane deed, the plat map, the title policy, and the postal route documentation in a manila folder inside a green painted binder on the second shelf of my office cabinet. Carol's handwriting was on the tab. Lane deed and easement records. Kyle, who was 12 when we moved in and 16 when Diane removed the mailbox, called the binder system my grievance library. He said it with more affection than teasing. He had grown up watching me file things the way other fathers file tools, by function, by date, by what they might someday be used to accomplish. After Carol died, the filing habit became more deliberate. She had been the one who would talk me out of reacting too fast, who would sit across from me at the kitchen table and say, in her steady way, that the documentation would still be there in the morning and I should eat dinner first. Without her, the binder was how I made myself patient. I had also, in those first years on the parcel, established a camera system along the lane entrance and the shop perimeter. 2 cameras feeding 2 separate drives, one in the shop and one at Kyle's aunt's house in Hazel Creek, because a pair of fabricating jacks had been stolen from the barn the winter after we moved in, and I was not going to let a future theft go undocumented. I mention this now because it matters later. Kyle grew into the system alongside me. By the time he was 15, he could pull and label a footage clip as efficiently as I could, and file it in the right spot in the binder without being asked. He said once that it was the most useful practical skill he had developed that did not involve a socket wrench. He was not wrong. He was not, and the footage from those 2 drives turned out to matter more than I had anticipated when I installed the cameras. Because people who spray paint your gatepost at 2 in the morning do not generally consider who might be recording the plate on their truck. Diane Marsh introduced herself in the spring of my 3rd year on the parcel. She drove in on a Saturday morning in a cream-colored SUV with a personalized plate that read BRCWDPREZ, which was either completely self-aware or completely not. Wearing a blazer the color of a traffic cone over yoga pants, and carrying a clipboard with a green lanyard printed with the Birchwood Estates logo, a stylized birch tree in a circle. She walked right past the no trespassing sign at the lane entrance, which Carol had painted herself on a piece of cedar board, white letters on dark green, and knocked on my front door like she had made an appointment nobody had told me about. She had linen flats on her feet that were the wrong shoe for mountain gravel, and she stepped over the wet patch near the drainage ditch the way someone steps over something offensive rather than something practical. I watched her come up the lane from the shop window before she reached the door. I had time to be calm before I opened it. She said she was conducting a community standards walkthrough and that my property presented aesthetic inconsistencies with the Birchwood Estates neighborhood character. I asked her calmly what her jurisdiction was. She drew herself up about half an inch and told me my parcel was functionally integrated into the Birchwood community, and therefore subject to community guidance. I wrote that phrase down later. Functionally integrated. Because it is the kind of phrase that sounds authoritative until someone asks you to define the function. I told her, in one level sentence, that my parcel was not in the Birchwood HOA, had never been in the Birchwood HOA, and that her jurisdiction ended at the boundary of Gary Marsh's original 2003 plat. She said she would need to look into that. She drove away down my lane, and I went inside and wrote the date, the time, her name and title, what she said and what I said, in the binder behind the lane deed. First contact, Saturday, April the 7th. No citation yet. Just a notation. Kyle was at the kitchen table doing geography and watched me write without asking. He already knew what I was doing. By that fall, the first formal notice arrived. Birchwood Estates letterhead, Diane's looping blue pen signature, dated October the 3rd, citing my firewood stack near the lane entrance as an aesthetic violation and referencing a specific section of the HOA CC and Rs. The CC and Rs section she cited applied only to Birchwood deeded properties. Mine was not one. I spent 20 minutes confirming my parcel number on the county assessor's website, took a screenshot, printed it, and stapled it to the back of the notice. Then I wrote a one-page response. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. Attaching the parcel map and the assessor records, and noting that the CC and Rs she had cited had no legal application to my property. Her response arrived 11 days later. It said my letter had been received and that the matter was under review. I filed it in the binder. Notice 1, October the 3rd. My firewood stack did not move. It was good seasoned pine stacked in the right place, and it stayed there. The second notice arrived in February of the following year. This one cited my lane gate, a simple pipe and chain across the entrance, as an unauthorized obstruction of community access. The gate had been installed by the Harbert family before the Birchwood subdivision was built. Carol had repainted the chain orange the first autumn we owned the property, because she said the original black made the entrance look threatening, and she wanted the lane to look like it welcomed the people who belonged there and let everyone else know it was private. The notice cited an easement of community access that Diane had apparently invented, because no such easement appeared anywhere in the county records. I sent a second certified letter attaching the recorded easement, highlighting the original recording date. Noting that the gate was on private property and that the easement was permissive in nature, not unconditional public access, and including an excerpt from the county road records confirming that Colton Lane had never been dedicated to public use and was not on the county maintenance schedule. Diane called 2 days after the letter arrived. Her voice was clipped. She told me I was creating a difficult situation for the community. I told her the difficult situation was that a subdivision had been built with its only access road crossing a private parcel without anyone reading the deed. She said that was an interesting perspective and hung up. Escalation 2. February the 19th, in the binder before I went to bed that night. The following spring, Gary Marsh's development company, Summit Line Property Group, filed a petition with the county to reclassify Colton Lane as a dedicated public road. The petition described the lane as a community access road of historical use and requested county maintenance designation, which would have transferred effective control of the road from my ownership to the county road district. I learned about this not from any service of process, since the petition had somehow omitted notifying the named landowner, an omission Carl Besch later said was either negligent or deliberate. And he told me flatly that either characterization made Gary's legal position worse. But from a county planner named Willis, who had driven out on a preliminary site visit and recognized my address from 26 years of mail route history he had been a recipient of. Willis called on a Thursday afternoon and said he thought I should know a petition had been filed on my lane address, and that the paperwork had a notification problem I ought to be aware of before the hearing schedule advanced. I thanked him, drove directly to the planning office, and pulled the full petition file. Gary's application listed the current property owner of Colton Lane as unknown. He had typed the word unknown in the field where the recorded owner's name was supposed to appear, on a parcel with a deed filed in 1961 and a plat map that had been in the county records ever since. I sat in the county parking lot with the folder on the steering wheel and the engine running and read that word twice and then a third time. Then I called Carl Besch. Carl had handled our closing and knew the deed the way a carpenter knows a joint he cut himself. He listened to me read the relevant section, and then he was quiet for a few seconds, which with Carl meant he was choosing words. He said what Gary had filed was legally incorrect in a specific way, that had a specific remedy called a quiet title action, and that a quiet title action would let me petition the court not just to confirm my existing easement rights, but to claim fee simple ownership of the physical road surface itself. The actual lane, not a right of use. The road. I asked how long, asked how. He said 6 to 10 months if nothing was contested hard. I told him to begin. I drove home and told Kyle. He set his pencil down and looked at me for a moment. Then he said quietly that Mom always said the road was the best part of the property. I told him she had been right about that from the first day we walked it. The escalations continued while the quiet title action was pending, and I want to be specific about each one because the specifics are what built the case and what justified what happened at the end. 3 months after I retained Carl, a man arrived on the lane in a white pickup with Summit Line Property Group on the door panel, carrying a measuring wheel and the easy professional confidence of someone sent on a job without being told whose land he was walking onto. He said he was conducting a preliminary survey for a county access study. I asked who had engaged the firm. He said, Summit Line Property Group. I told him he was on private property without a survey license from the owner and needed to leave. He left without an argument. I photographed the truck at the lane entrance before it cleared, both the plate and the company name on the door, and called Carl. Carl had a cease and desist to Summit Line's registered address by 5 in the afternoon. That was escalation 3. 2 weeks after that, I found community access spray-painted in orange letters on the asphalt patch at my gate post. My camera system, installed after a tool theft 3 winters back and running 2 drives simultaneously, one in the shop and one off-site at Kyle's aunt's house in Hazel Creek, had footage of a man in a dark jacket at 2:14 in the morning. I could not make the face from the camera angle, but the truck plates matched a vehicle registered to a subcontractor with a current Summit Line contract, which Carl confirmed when I gave him the number. I photographed the vandalism from 3 angles in morning light, pulled the footage from both drives, sealed a copy on a thumb drive in a labeled envelope, and added the packet to the binder with the date and the plate number. Escalation 4. I left the painted letters exactly as they were. Evidence stays in place. That October, Diane held a community meeting at the Birchwood Clubhouse. My neighbor Pat Givens attended. Pat had been a middle school history teacher for 30 years, and she took notes the way middle school history teachers take notes, organized and dated and verbatim where it mattered most. She slid a 2-page handwritten summary under my door the morning after. Diane had told the assembled homeowners that a private individual was attempting to hold the community's mail access hostage and that the county process would resolve the situation before spring. She had described my parcel as a relic parcel with no meaningful legal standing to obstruct community infrastructure. She had told them to trust Gary, that he was handling it, and that the board had the situation under control. What she had not told them was that the quiet title action had been filed 2 months earlier, and Gary's attorneys had been served. She had not told them about the county planner's notification flag on the original petition. She had not mentioned the cease and desist or any of the certified letters or the code of why Colton Lane was recorded as private in the first place. I added Pat's summary to the binder behind the cease and desist. Escalation 5. The gap between what Diane was telling her neighbors and what was in the county record was wide enough by now to be its own kind of evidence. Kyle sat across from me when I filed it and watched me close the binder. He said after a moment that some of those people at the meeting probably had no idea any of this was happening and were just following their board president. I told him I thought he was almost certainly right about that. I had delivered mail to enough neighborhoods over the years to know that neighbors on a street trusted their board, signed the forms they were given, and never pulled a plat map in their lives. That was not stupidity. That was how most people lived, because most people had not spent their career watching what happened when the paperwork got ignored. What I could not figure out, and what Pat's notes made clear, was whether Diane herself fully understood what Gary was doing behind the HOA machinery she was running for him, or whether she believed every word she was saying. I still did not know the answer to that at the hearing. I am not sure it mattered to the outcome. Then came January, 3 weeks before the commissioner's hearing, and escalation 6, which crossed a line the others had not. Diane filed a formal complaint with the County Code Enforcement Office, claiming that my gate was a public nuisance and an unauthorized structure causing demonstrable harm to community safety and access. A code officer named Tara arrived on a Wednesday morning in a county vehicle, badge on her belt, tablet in hand. With the expression of a professional doing a required job she did not expect to come out well. She told me she was required to respond to formal complaints regardless of her personal assessment of their merit, that this was the nature of the position, and that she needed to document the structure in question. I told her I understood the process completely and invited her inside. I put coffee on. I set the binder on the kitchen table. She sat down and spent 45 minutes reading through it from the first notation to the most recent page. She read the easement deed. She read both certified letters. She read Gary's petition with the word unknown in the owner field. She read Carl's quiet title filing. She read the cease and desist letter and the plate and footage packet from Escalation 4. She read Pat's notes from the community meeting. She set Pat's notes down and looked up from the table. She asked me if I was the Ray Colton who had carried the North County route out of Hazel Creek. I said I was. She said her mother had been on that route for 17 years, and that I had once held a certified medical package at the door in a February snowstorm rather than leave it on a porch that was already icing over, and that her mother had talked about it for years afterward as an example of someone doing their job with actual care. I told her I remembered the route, but not the specific package, which was true. Then Tara told me, in her official capacity, that the gate did not meet the county threshold for a nuisance finding, and that she would be filing a no-action report with the code office. She said the complaint, in her professional assessment, did not appear to have been filed by an affected party in proximity to any genuine nuisance, but rather by an association asserting a jurisdiction the filed records did not support. She said she was not in a position to make legal determinations, but that she could put her field findings in writing and that her field findings were going to be clear. I thanked her for saying it plainly. She said she had learned to say things plainly from 17 years of doing inspections on rural properties where nothing was ever as simple as the complaint letter made it sound. She asked whether I had legal counsel active on the property matter. I gave her Carl's card. She put on her jacket, thanked me for the coffee, and left. I added the visit to the binder, officer name, date, no action finding, January the 14th. Then I sat at the kitchen table with the binder closed in front of me and the orange chain visible through the window over the sink. And I thought about Carol's handwriting on the tab, and I knew it was over. The hearing was just the part where Harmon said it out loud in a room with witnesses. The commissioner's public hearing was held on a Thursday morning in February in the county building's second-floor meeting room. Fluorescent lighting and a commercial carpet pattern that had not been changed since at least the previous administration. 32 Birchwood homeowners came, most of them looking worried rather than hostile. The look of people who had bought their houses in good faith and had only recently come to understand that the access road to their neighborhood was the subject of legal proceedings they had not been part of and not been told about. Gary Marsh sat in the front row in a charcoal blazer with a Summit Line folder on his knee. He was a solid man in his mid-50s with the settled bearing of someone who had gotten his way enough times that pushback arrived as something close to physical surprise. Diane sat beside him in a red blazer, straight-backed, clipboard on her crossed knees, her expression arranged into something between authority and anticipation. Carl and I sat at the respondents' table. Kyle had asked to come. I told him it was a school day and he would be more useful doing the calculus assignment he had been putting off. He made me promise to call the moment it was done. Harmon opened by reading the petition summary into the record. Community access road. Historical use. Undetermined ownership. He was a careful man, Harmon, one of those county officials who had been doing the same job long enough that he had no interest in theater and no patience for it either. He read the summary the way a man reads a document he intends to hold other people accountable to, slowly and without editorializing. People in the room shifted in their chairs. Gary's folder was still closed. Diane's clipboard was on her knee. Then he gave the floor to Gary's attorney. Devlin was polished and well-prepared, speaking for 14 minutes on historical community use, postal route dependency, emergency vehicle access, and the administrative burden of private ownership of an essential subdivision road. He cited 2 Colorado court cases on road dedication through long-term public use. He was smooth, thorough, and had built a sound argument for a situation that had ended 4 days earlier. When Harmon asked for the respondent's presentation, Carl stood. He set 3 documents on the table in front of Harmon in a single quiet motion and stepped back. He did not explain them. He did not narrate them. He sat down. Harmon picked up the deed first. He read the relevant paragraph, the 1961 recording, the lane boundary, the full conveyance to the current owner of record, then the plat map, his index finger tracing the lane line as it ran inside my parcel boundary, not beside it and not between it and Birchwood, but inside it, as it had been on the map since 1961. Then he picked up the quiet title judgment and turned to the last page. He read the recording information printed there. He set the document flat on the table and held it there under his palm and looked up at Gary's attorney. Devlin was looking at his phone on the table in front of him, face down, with the stillness of someone who had just received bad news through a channel he could not acknowledge in a public room. Gary in the front row was not moving. His folder was still closed on his knee. Diane had set her clipboard on the chair beside her and was looking at Harmon. Harmon asked Carl, in a voice that was careful and level, to read the recording date aloud for the record. Carl said, Monday, February the 9th. Harmon looked at Devlin. Devlin looked at his folder. Harmon said, measuring every word, that the county could not designate as a dedicated public road a road whose fee simple title had been recorded in a private party's name 4 days before the current hearing date. He said the petition as filed lacked a viable legal basis, and that petitioners wishing to pursue public access going forward would need to negotiate a conveyance or a formal dedication agreement with the fee simple owner, who was present in the room today. He asked Diane, as HOA president, whether she had anything to add to the record. Diane looked at Gary. Gary did not look back at her. He was looking at the middle distance between the respondent's table and the hearing officer's desk. The look of a man doing arithmetic on a problem he should have run 4 years earlier. Diane said, in a voice that had come down from its clipboard register into something flatter and smaller, that she would need to consult with the board. Harmon said he had no doubt. He tapped his folder closed. He called the matter concluded and adjourned. The room held a beat of quiet, the kind that comes when 32 homeowners realize at roughly the same moment that they have been attending a hearing about a problem that was always going to end this way, and that nobody who should have told them this had done so. Carl put the 3 documents back in his briefcase in the same order he had set them out. I stood, shook his hand, and walked out through the side door into the county parking lot, where the foothills were visible past the building's roofline, pale brown and snowed in on the upper ridges. And I called Kyle. He picked up on the first ring. I told him it was done. He asked right away which 3 documents Carl had put on the table. I told him the deed, the plat map, and the quiet title judgment with the recording date being Monday the 9th. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said Mom would have loved the part about the recording date being 4 days before the hearing. He said she always appreciated when timing had a little theater in it. I told him I had not planned the timing, that the court had set the recording schedule and I had simply shown up. He said that was exactly why it was theatrical. I drove home on Colton Lane, same as I had done for 4 years, past the orange chain and the gate post, with the spray-painted letters I repainted that afternoon in the same green as the post. Because the case was done, and evidence that has served its purpose does not need to remain on display. I repainted the post with the same small brush Carol had kept in the shop, the one with her initials on the handle and a strip of masking tape she had put there years ago so it would not get mixed in with mine. I used the full can. The post was solid green by the time I came inside, and the lane looked the way it always had. Except that nobody who had tried to take it was ever going to try again. The binder went back on the second shelf behind Carol's handwritten tab. Kyle found me there that evening, standing with the cabinet door open, and he stood with me for a minute without saying anything. Then we went to make dinner. In the 30 days after the hearing, the proportionate part played out in plain sequence. The United States Postal Service, whose district council had been monitoring the petition proceedings because access disruption to a delivery route is a federal operational concern, sent formal written notice to the Birchwood Estates HOA board advising that rural delivery service to the subdivision depended on continued private owner access to Colton Lane, and that any interruption would require the carrier to deliver on foot from the county road stop, adding approximately 45 minutes to the daily route with no guarantee of continuity in weather events. The notice was addressed to Diane as board president, and she did not share it with the homeowners for 11 days. A Birchwood resident named Doug, who ran a small home-based HVAC parts business and tracked his incoming shipments by habit and necessity, discovered 2 packages had been held at the post office during the access uncertainty. He posted about it on the neighborhood forum and tagged 20 neighbors by name. The board meeting that followed was not recorded, but 3 separate residents described it to me over the following 2 weeks, independently and with consistent details. And the picture that emerged was that Gary's name came up considerably more than Diane's, and that neither of them left the room in good standing with the people they had been telling not to worry. Gary's Summit Line permit applications for the gated entry feature and brick monument he had designed for the Colton Lane entrance were denied by the county planning office, which cited the recorded change in lane ownership as a disqualifying condition, and noted that structural improvements on a privately owned road required the owner's documented consent, which had not been sought. The permit fee was non-refundable. Carl confirmed the amount for me when I asked, $11,400. Diane resigned from the HOA presidency 6 weeks after the hearing, citing personal time demands. A man named Roger was elected to the board and called me in his first week. We met with Carl on a Tuesday morning in the county library's small conference room. Carl had prepared a permissive use access license for postal service and emergency vehicles on Colton Lane, properly recorded with the county clerk, with the HOA responsible for gravel surface maintenance and the landowner retaining all ownership rights in full. Roger read the document twice. He asked 2 questions, both practical and both answered clearly in the text. He signed it. He shook my hand with both of his, the kind of handshake that has something more than courtesy in it. He seemed like a person who had been following a bad compass for several years and was genuinely relieved to have an accurate map. He asked me, before we left the library conference room, whether I had any plans to pursue damages through a civil action. I told him I did not. I told him the license was what I had wanted, the documentation of what I already owned, and a neighbor who understood the situation clearly. He said that was more reasonable than he had expected, given what the board had put me through. I told him the board had not put me through it. The board had followed someone who had not done her homework. That was a different thing. Here is what I want you to take from this, said plainly. When you own property with a private road or lane on it, pull your deed and your plat map and read them together. The deed tells you what you own. The plat map tells you where it sits on the ground. Those are 2 different documents, and you need both. If there is a lane on your land that other people use, find out in the county records whether it was ever formally dedicated to public use, because long-term use by itself does not transfer ownership. If a private lane you own happens to be part of a postal delivery route or a utility access route, find out what that operational dependency is worth before someone files a petition to reclassify the road away from you. The quiet title process is real. It is available to private landowners in most states, and you do not have to wait for a challenge before you file. Build your binder from the day you sign the closing documents, not from the day the first notice arrives. Every certified letter sent, every notice received, every site visit, every date, every name. If a code officer comes to your door, invite them in and hand them the binder. They are constrained professionals doing their jobs, and they pivot when the documentation is clean and complete. If a petition is filed on your road without notice to you, call the county planning office and pull the file yourself, because you may not be served in time and the clock will already be running. Drop your own story in the comments if any of this sounds like something you have been through or are going through right now. If you are new here, subscribe, and there is a new story every week. Next week, a retired engineer who spent 12 years fighting an HOA that had been collecting dues on a parcel. The HOA's own original survey had accidentally excluded from the map back in 1998. I will see you then. Take care of your deeds, and your deeds will take care of you.